Welcome to the realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Josh West woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. The number was unknown, and he hesitated for a moment before answering. The voice on the other end was calm but authoritative, introducing itself as a representative of the Space Research Board. The caller explained that they had been monitoring Josh's unique red peppers, which he grew in his backyard, and wanted to use them for a groundbreaking experiment in space. Josh, skeptical and convinced it was a prank, hung up the phone. But when the calls persisted, he began to wonder if there was more to this strange offer. Why? Josh asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Why would anyone want to use peppers in space? The man on the phone insisted that the matter was too complex to discuss over the phone and invited Josh to meet in person at the board's headquarters. Curiosity got the better of him, and Josh agreed. A few hours later, he found himself in a sleek, modern building sitting across from the man who had called him. The man, dressed in a sharp suit, leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "We've discovered something extraordinary about your peppers," the man began, his voice low and serious. "They have a unique effect on extraterrestrial women. Specifically, they seem to enhance certain neurological responses. We need your help to confirm our findings." Josh raised an eyebrow, his skepticism still intact. "So, this is a scientific study? Or some kind of bizarre fantasy?" The man smiled faintly. "This is entirely scientific. We've identified a compound in your peppers, capsaicin, that interacts with the metabolism of extraterrestrial females in a way we've never seen before. We need to observe this firsthand." Josh crossed his arms, trying to process the information. "And where do I fit into all of this?" The man's gaze intensified. "Your peppers are special. The levels of capsaicin are unlike anything we've found on Earth. We want to use them in a controlled experiment. And if you're willing, you can be part of it." Josh blinked, caught off guard. "Me? How?" The man leaned back, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "We've arranged for you to meet one of the extraterrestrial women. During the meeting, your peppers will be served. We need to observe the effects." Josh hesitated, his mind racing. The idea was absurd, yet something about the man's tone made it hard to dismiss. "What does she look like?" he asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. The man chuckled softly. "You'll see for yourself. So, what do you say, Josh? Are you ready to contribute to the future of science?" Josh took a deep breath. Despite the strangeness of the situation, his curiosity won out. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." The man's smile widened. "Excellent. We'll see you tomorrow." The next day, Josh arrived at the facility, his nerves on edge. He was led to a small, dimly lit room where a table was set for two. Moments later, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was unlike anyone Josh had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent, and her long, white hair cascaded down her back. Her eyes were sharp, with an otherworldly glint, and her movements were graceful yet deliberate. She wore a black lace top and a short skirt, her attire both elegant and slightly unsettling. She sat across from Josh, her expression unreadable. "I was told I'd be paid for this," she said, her voice soft but firm, "and that no harm would come to me." Josh nodded, trying to appear calm. "Same here. I'm not entirely sure what's going on either." The woman studied him for a moment before turning her attention to the food that was brought in. They ate in relative silence, the tension in the room palpable. Finally, the last dish arrived, a plate of Josh's red peppers. Josh watched as the woman picked up one of the peppers, examining it curiously before taking a small bite. At first, nothing happened, but then her eyes narrowed slightly and she licked her lips. She took another bite, this time larger, and her breathing became heavier. She shifted in her seat, her fingers brushing against her neck. "Interesting flavor," she murmured, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. Josh forced a smile. "Good, right?" The woman's gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, Josh felt as though she could see right through him. "Very," she said, her voice dripping with a newfound intensity. She leaned forward slightly, her movements slow and deliberate. Perhaps we should move somewhere more private. Josh's heart raced. He had expected something unusual. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He glanced at the camera in the corner of the room, knowing the experiment was being monitored. "I think we need to check with the people in charge," he said, trying to sound composed. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Josh excused himself and stepped out of the room, finding the man from the board waiting for him. "She's reacting strongly," Josh said, his voice low. "She wants to leave. What should I do?" The man's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Go with her. But remember, we need data. Observe her closely and report back." Josh hesitated, but ultimately agreed. He returned to the room, where the woman was waiting impatiently. "We can go," he said. She smiled a slow, knowing smile and stood up. "Lead the way." They left the facility and drove to Josh's home. The woman seemed fascinated by everything, her alien nature becoming more apparent as the night went on. The effects of the peppers lingered, and she grew bolder, her actions more intimate. Josh, though initially hesitant, found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, Josh woke up to find her lying beside him, her pale skin glowing in the early light. She turned to him, her eyes soft but still piercing. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm. Josh blinked, still groggy from sleep. "Knew what?" he replied, though deep down he had a feeling what she was referring to. "About the peppers," she said, her tone steady but not accusatory. "You knew they would affect me." Josh sat up slightly, running a hand through his hair. "I knew they were part of an experiment," he admitted, "but I didn't know how they would affect you." "Not really." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his face. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I figured as much. You don't seem like the type to manipulate someone." Josh let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. "I'm not," he said firmly. "I was just curious, and maybe a little reckless." She chuckled softly, the sound like a gentle breeze. "Curiosity isn't a bad thing. It's what brought us here after all." Josh couldn't help but smile back. "Yeah, I guess it did." He paused, then added, "I'm Josh, by the way. I don't think I ever properly introduced myself." Her smile widened. "I'm Lyra," she said. "And before you ask, yes, that's my real name. Or, at least, the closest translation in your language." "Lyra," Josh repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It suits you." They fell into a comfortable silence, the morning light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, everything felt normal, as if this were just another day, but Josh couldn't shake the feeling that their connection was anything but ordinary. Over the next few days, Josh and Lyra spent nearly every moment together. She was fascinated by Earth, its sights, sounds, and even its mundane routines. Josh, in turn, was captivated by her. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, her alien nature blending seamlessly with a warmth and curiosity that made her feel both extraordinary and familiar. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lyra turned to him. "Josh," she began, her voice thoughtful, "what happens now?" Josh frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean this," she said, gesturing between them. "I'm not from here. I don't belong on Earth. And you have a life here. How long can this last?" Josh hesitated. The question had been lingering in the back of his mind, but he hadn't wanted to confront it. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that I don't want this to end." Lyra's expression softened. "Neither do I. But we can't ignore the reality of our situation." Josh reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then we'll figure it out together. There has to be a way." The next morning, Josh woke up with a plan. He contacted the Space Research Board, though he had no intention of rejoining their experiments. Instead, he requested a meeting with the man who had initially approached him. To his surprise, the man agreed. When Josh arrived at the facility, he was led to the same room where he'd first met Lyra. The man from the board was waiting for him, his expression unreadable. "Josh," the man said, nodding in greeting, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you again." "I need your help," Josh said, cutting straight to the point. "Lyra, the woman from the experiment, she can't stay on Earth indefinitely. But I don't want to lose her. Is there any way she could visit? Or maybe even stay permanently? The man raised an eyebrow. You're asking for a lot, Josh. This isn't a simple matter of paperwork. There are protocols, regulations. I know, Josh interrupted, but you owe me. You used me and her for your experiment. The least you can do is help us. The man sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'll see what I can do, he said finally, but I can't make any promises. Weeks passed, and Josh heard nothing from the board. He and Lyra continued their routine, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on both of them. Then, one evening, as they were preparing dinner, Josh's phone rang. It was the man from the board. We've reached a compromise, the man said without preamble. Lyra can stay on Earth, but under certain conditions. She'll need to be monitored periodically, and she'll have to agree to participate in non-invasive studies. But she'll be free to live her life here, with you, if that's what you both want. Josh's heart leapt. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. When he told Lyra the news, her eyes lit up with a joy that made Josh's chest ache. You did this for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For us, Josh corrected. I couldn't imagine my life without you. Lyra threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. Thank you, she murmured into his shoulder, for giving me a home. From that day on, Josh and Lyra built a life together. They faced challenges, of course. Adjusting to each other's worlds wasn't always easy, but their bond only grew stronger with time. Josh continued to grow his peppers, though he kept them far away from any experiments. And Lyra, with her unique perspective and endless curiosity, brought a sense of wonder to their everyday lives. Years later, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Josh turned to Lyra. Do you ever miss it? He asked. You're home, I mean. Lyra smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. This is my home now, she said simply, with you. Josh smiled back, his heart full. No matter where they'd come from or what challenges they'd faced, they'd found something rare and beautiful together. And in the end, that was all that mattered.